A portion of this video is sponsored by Red Magic, more about them later. There's a limit to what your eyes can see. The human eye is surprisingly easy to fool. I mean, take a look at this. It's made from a bunch of drawings, all completely static, and yet we can bring it to life just by flipping through the pages. And for the last roughly 200 years, we've been building machines designed to do exactly that. To trick your eyes and to trick your brain into seeing motion where there is none. But yeah, this was like $6 on Amazon. This bad boy though comes in at almost $1,100. It runs at 540 Hz and can even do 720 Hz at a lower resolution. Better than this little flipbook, that's for sure. But this really makes you wonder, what even is the maximum frame rate the human eye can see? Like, when do we reach the point where adding more frames doesn't bring any more benefits? I mean, for the longest time, people have been watching movies at roughly 24 frames per second and have been pretty happy with that. Apparently 24 FPS are already enough that our brain accepts what it sees as real. So why do we keep chasing higher and higher frame rates and refresh rates? Do we really need hundreds of hertz and FPS? Or is this all just a huge marketing gimmick? You know, I'll let you in on a little secret. Tech companies don't really care if it's actually gonna improve your viewing or gaming experience, as long as they can sell expensive toys to gamers. And there's actually good evidence, several studies, that seem to indicate that people can't reliably perceive more than roughly 60 Hz. And people on the internet love this. Kinda became a meme to say that the human eye can't see more than 60 Hz or FPS, especially when someone just spent hard-earned money on a new high refresh rate monitor. The internet really is a wonderful place, but you know, there is a nugget of truth in these meme posts. These papers exist, multiple studies that seem to claim that the human eye can see past around 50 to 90 Hz depending on the study. Like this one here, 90 Hz, or this one, 65 Hz. This one is even lower, 34 to 52 Hz depending on the luminance level. Or this one here, maxes out just below 50 Hz. So why does the research say that? Well, those papers are on the critical flicker frequency, or CFF for short. So the researchers take a light source, which can be a display, but this can also be a laser or an LED light, and they modulate this light source at different frequencies and try to figure out the point at which humans stop seeing the light flicker. But this is not just about flicker-free displays or flicker-free lights. This number, this critical flicker frequency, actually tells us something about how we experience the flow of time itself. It sounds kind of crazy how we went from flickering lights to how we humans experience time, but these two things are actually closely connected. Let me explain. If you ever wondered why it's so hard for us humans to catch a fly while birds do it so easily, here's why. The left side shows how we see flies, while the right side shows how a pied flycatcher, this little bird, sees it. The bird basically sees the flies in slow motion, which obviously makes it much easier to catch one. And this is directly tied to the critical flicker frequency. That little bird has a CFF that's about twice as high as that of humans, which tells us that its temporal resolution is about twice as high as ours, giving it that slow-mo vision. In the animal world, our vision is slow. Humans are average at best and can't really see a lot of hertz or FPS. So, in a way, those people claiming that the human eye can see more than 60 Hz are somewhat right. That is the limit of our temporal resolution, so the frame rate of our consciousness, if you will. And yes, this is somewhere around 60 Hz, but this doesn't at all mean that the human eye can see more than 60 Hz or FPS on a monitor, for instance. There are actually multiple things that the human eye can pick up far above 60 Hz. You know, it's kind of like you can't see the wind, but you can still see the trees bending in a storm. You might not be able to see and count each individual frame on your monitor, but there are very real, visible effects of the refresh rate and frame rate that you can see. And you might be surprised how many hertz we actually need until these become invisible. Alright, let's pause for a moment to talk about the sponsor of this segment, Red Magic and their new Red Magic 11 Air. While the 11 Pro pushes performance to the limit, the new Red Magic 11 Air is designed for a different kind of gamer, for everyone who wants strong performance in a much slimmer package. The body of the phone is just 7.85mm thin with almost no camera bump, but it packs some serious hardware. It's equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Elite processor and an advanced cooling system, delivering impressive performance capable of handling even demanding games. What makes the 11 Air special though is that it doesn't sacrifice sustained performance despite being a slim phone. It features a real physical fan, a large vapor chamber, and graphene thermal layers. This advanced cooling system allows the phone to sustain high frame rates during long gaming sessions without the performance hits you typically see in thinner devices. And despite its slim size, Red Magic managed to fit a massive 7000 mAh battery inside, giving you plenty of headroom for gaming and daily tasks. And to fill it back up, the 11 Air supports 80-watt fast charging. And all that hardware sits behind a stunning display. You're looking at a 6.85-inch OLED panel with super narrow bezels and a front-facing camera that's hidden under the display. That gives the 11 Air an impressive 95.1% screen-to-body ratio, and this display also runs at 144Hz for smooth visuals. The 11 Air also comes with the 520Hz dual-shoulder triggers we already know from the 11 Pro, giving you an advantage in competitive first-person shooters. So if you want a serious gaming phone that doesn't feel bulky in your pocket, the Red Magic 11 Air is the one to check out. Follow the links in the video description to learn more. Now back to the video. So let's start with the bare minimum, a flicker-free display. What's the refresh rate we need for that? And this is a lot more complicated than you might think, because the answer is not 60 Hz. It's easy to see those flicker studies and fall into this trap. I mean, sounds very intuitive. Humans can't see flicker above like 60 Hz, so a 60 Hz monitor it is, but the reality is a lot more complex. See, if I set this monitor to 60 Hz and run a flicker test, it flickers like crazy. But then outside of this test, it's perfectly fine. So to understand what's going on here, we need to take a look at how film projectors work. Seems kind of random, I know, but this will make a few things easier to understand. See, most movies run at about 24 FPS, which obviously is much lower than 60 Hz, well below the flicker threshold. So you'd expect film projectors to flicker like crazy, but they don't. I mean, some do, but good projectors don't. See, the source material, the film, only contains 24 individual frames per second, but good projectors use what's called a triple-bladed shutter to show each individual frame 3 times in a row. So while this is still 24 FPS source material, the projector essentially runs at 72 Hz, which is above typical flicker thresholds. And this is important because film projectors go blank in between frames. They have to do this because they actually have to physically move to the next frame on the film strip. If they weren't hiding that the film is moving, you just see a blurry mess on screen. But this blanking, the abrupt switching between light and dark, is risky. At 24 Hz, this flicker would be unbearable to watch. So they have to push that number higher by flashing the same image multiple times. But monitors don't have to do this. See, when I set this monitor to 24 Hz, it doesn't just start flickering like crazy. This still looks perfectly fine. And that's because most modern screens use what's called the sample and hold method. They don't turn black in between frames. Unless you enable special black frame insertion modes, your monitor just switches the pixels from one color to another and then holds them there until transitioning to the next color. And this is very important. Because if you pay attention to these flicker studies, 60 Hz means 60 cycles of on and off, or black and white. So if you wanted to replicate this on your monitor, TV, or whatever somewhat modern display you have at home, it would need to run at 120 Hz to show 60 Hz flicker. So you know, these meme posts would actually need to tell people that the human eye can't see more than 120 Hz and not 60 Hz when we're talking monitors. But please don't do that. That's really not what this is all about. The only thing that this tells us really is that flicker can be visible on monitors with a refresh rate below roughly 100 to 180 Hz. And I was curious, so I tried it myself, and yes, I can clearly see flicker in the 140 Hz range. But then one step above that, at 90 cycles or about 180 Hz, this just looks like solid gray to my eyes. I know the camera will make this look weird, but to my eyes, this just looks like solid gray. And that pretty much checks out with what the studies found. But this doesn't at all mean that refresh rates above that aren't visible to the human eye. This is just one effect, one test that demonstrates how many frames our eyes can see. But there are many more things that our eyes can pick up. See, some researchers looked at these tests and said, hold on, monitors don't just switch between empty black and white images. They show actual images with shapes and high contrast edges. So what if we do a similar test but add a high contrast edge? Just like this. Simple half black, half white image. And they inverted every frame. And this changes everything. Suddenly, every single participant was able to detect at least 200 Hz flicker, and for the median viewer, flicker only disappeared at over 500 Hz. So, does it mean that this monitor running at 540 Hz would be like good enough for most people? Well, not really, because 1 Hz in the context of the study means one frame like this plus a second frame that's inverted. So most people would need at least a 1000 Hz monitor to not see flicker in this test. And the most sensitive person they tested would need a monitor with more than 1600 Hz. That is crazy. And I've actually tried this on this monitor, and yes, at 540 Hz, I can easily spot some weird flicker artifacts. It's somewhat fine if you can keep your eyes completely still, but man, as soon as you make the tiniest eye movements, the edge in the middle of the screen starts looking super weird. And I also added a checkerboard pattern to this test, which, yeah, makes it even worse. I'd love to see how this would look like on a 1000 Hz or even a 2000 Hz display. Unfortunately, it's pretty much impossible to demonstrate this effect on camera, so I have this little test website that I made linked down below. I'm not sure how bug-free it actually is, but still might be interesting to check out if you have a high refresh rate monitor. Now the question really is though, how all this translates to us just using our monitors for stuff like gaming or browsing through the web. And yeah, chances are you won't encounter anything that's exactly like this test in the real world. You probably don't stare at inverting test patterns all day, but you will do things that create very similar effects, like dragging a bright window across a dark desktop. There's a high contrast edge as well, and the pixels are flipping from black to white and the other way around. And you can see this in games too. Most gamers might not know the exact science, but they've seen this effect for years. There's a reason that one of the first things most gamers do when they sit down at a new monitor is to look for a high contrast edge and shake their mouse.
Like, you can read the text, Graham, here!
And there are two different things that your eyes can pick up here. You see different effects depending on whether you keep your eyes glued to the crosshair or follow the on-screen movement with your eyes. Here's what's going on in each scenario. Say you spot an opponent at the edge of your screen. Your eyes then quickly focus on the target and follow it while you bring your crosshair over. What you're gonna see is motion blur. I've put together this contraption to better demonstrate the effect. See, the amount of motion blur that your eyes can pick up mainly depends on two factors: the speed of the target that you are tracking and the hold time of the display. And here at 60 Hz and 60 FPS, even slow movements can create lots of motion blur. At 60 Hz, each frame is held for roughly 70 milliseconds, in which our eyes, or the camera in this case, has already moved some distance, creating this blur effect. So the faster I move the camera, the blurrier it gets. See, slow movements are still fine, but when I increase the speed, the image gets pretty blurry. If we bump up the refresh rate and frame rate, the hold time decreases and tracking the target gets a lot easier. At 540 Hz, I can move pretty fast and still get a clear view of the target. So what's the magic frame rate and refresh rate we need for no motion blur? As you can imagine, it's tricky to put an exact number to that because it depends on a lot of factors. Like, how close are you to your monitor? If you're sitting close to a large monitor, even slow mouse movements can result in fast motion speeds relative to your eyes. Then of course, how fast you move your mouse matters too. And so does how fast you're even able to track the motion with your eyes. Resolution and contrast are a factor too. A 1080p screen can mask some motion blur that you might have been able to spot on a 4K display. And response times have an impact as well. This monitor is using a super fast OLED panel with almost instant response times, but if you try this on a slower LCD monitor, the ghosting or smearing can mask a lot of motion blur. So This isn't an easy question to answer, but some researchers came up with a model to calculate the frame rate we need based on a variety of factors. And they concluded that in extreme scenarios, we might need around 700 FPS to stop seeing motion blur, which, yeah, is a lot. So we have motion blur, which probably is visible up to around 700 Hz in FPS. And we looked at those flicker studies, which showed that humans could still pick up refresh rate related effects even on displays with up to 1600 Hz. But what is the maximum that was ever proven to be humanly detectable? Well, there's the study where one person was able to detect something that will blow your mind. A whopping 19,810 on and off cycles, which is the highest number I could find. But the implications for monitors are even more mind-bending, because as most of these tests, this was done with a super bright LED. But if we would try to replicate this on a monitor, it would need a refresh rate of 39,620 Hz. That is insane. Of course, not everyone will be able to detect frequencies as high as this. This absolute chat scored several thousand Hz higher than most of the participants in that study. And you know, in the experiments, they've been staring at an insanely bright LED shining through a tiny little slit, and they had to make rapid eye movements. So it's fair to say that if we translate this to monitors, this would be a niche scenario. But what if we, instead of making rapid eye movements and keeping the light source steady, we instead keep our eyes steady and move the light source? Like the mouse cursor. This can be a light source, and we can make rapid movements. The effect is very similar to what they've tested in that study, but we call this effect the stroboscopic effect instead of the phantom ray effect. And I'm sure you've seen this effect on your monitor before, and funnily enough, this is often one of the first things people do when getting a new high refresh rate monitor.
Oh my gosh, wait. Okay, whenever I get a new monitor, the first thing I always do is I go onto Windows desktop and I just move the cursor. Holy fuck, it is so smooth.
What you're looking for is that trail the cursor leaves behind. This is directly tied to the refresh rate of the display. And the higher the refresh rate gets, the closer the copies that trail behind the cursor merge together. Blurbusters.com actually has a great demo of this, where you can see what this looks like at different refresh rates. At 540 or even 720 Hz, you already gotta move the mouse pretty fast to even see the trail. Sure, you're probably not buying a high refresh rate monitor just because swirling around the mouse on the desktop looks so much better. But the same effect can also be seen in-game. We already discovered that if you follow the target with your eyes, you're gonna see motion blur. But if you instead focus on the crosshair and keep your eyes steady, you see the stroboscopic effect. Just like the mouse cursor, there are multiple images that trail behind whatever is moving on screen. And you don't have to be a scientist to see that this makes hitting your shots harder. So naturally, we don't want this. But to get rid of that, we either have to move slower or increase our refresh rate and frame rate. And there's a lot of research on how many frames you actually need to make the stroboscopic effect disappear. And the numbers I found are around 600 Hz, which, you know, doesn't sound too bad, as we've just talked about the many thousand Hz in the FPS that we need to get rid of some of the other effects. But this number ultimately depends on the speed of the motion. And it's important to keep in mind that most of the research on this topic is done in the context of cinema and television. So the maximum speeds they test are much slower than what you typically reach in games. In fact, it's about this speed. This should be roughly the fastest speed they used if you translate it to a 27-inch monitor at a 60cm viewing distance. And yeah, 70 degrees per second is slow when we're talking gaming. It's easy to get like 10 times that or even more in fast mouse flicks. So even at 720 Hz and FPS, I can still see the stroboscopic effect pretty easily. I gotta say though that the maximum speed that I can move my mouse without seeing multiple after images is pretty fast at this refresh rate. But on fast flicks, it's still visible. Which is kinda surprising, honestly. Before I got this monitor, I thought 720 Hz already had to be perfect, right? I mean, it is insanely smooth, but it's still not perfect. I find it surprising, honestly, that we need even more frames and more Hertz to completely fool our eyes. We probably need thousands of frames per second before the motion on screen becomes completely indistinguishable from real life. possibly up to 40,000 Hz and FPS. You need that many frames to play your games, to win games, or just enjoy playing games? Absolutely not. I hope that much is clear. But I think it's still something that's worth chasing. Thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.